Your mouth is open, but no air is coming in. The ceiling lights above you smear into long white knives, and the world collapses into a single sound. A slow, wet clicking somewhere inside your own throat. Someone says your name, too far away. Then the room tilts, and everything goes quiet in the way snow goes quiet, like the universe just swallowed a secret. People tell you death is instant, a clean blackout, a simple exit. But what if the most dangerous part of dying isn't dying at all? What if the real event begins after the final breath, when your body is finished, but you haven't fully detached yet, and something in you is still responsive, still impressionable, still steerable? Here's the part modern culture doesn't know how to hold. There are traditions that behave as if death has a timeline. Not a metaphorical one, a functional one. A counted span, measured in days, where consciousness moves like a drifting ember, searching for wind. In some places, it's 40 days. In Tibet, it's 14. Different numbers, same warning. There is a window where the mind is not anchored, and what it grasps can decide what it becomes. The Tibetans didn't treat that window like grief. They treated it like a corridor, with instructions taped to the walls. Because in their view, right after death, perception doesn't vanish, it intensifies. It blooms. It fractures. It manufactures lights and terrors and seductive comforts so convincing they feel like truth. And if you mistake what you're seeing, even once, you don't just get scared, you get directed. So the question isn't, is there life after death? The question is, who or what gets your attention first? Most people don't realize how thoroughly the modern world trains you to look away from death. We hide it behind paperwork and euphemisms. We turn it into a statistic, a tragedy, a medical failure. And then, when it finally arrives, we act shocked that we are unprepared, as if unpreparedness is not the entire design. But in the Tibetan view, death is not an error. It is not a moral punishment. It is not a spiritual graduation ceremony where everyone gets a crown for being brave. It is a transition with physics. Not physical physics. No laboratory will hand you a ruler for it, but a set of repeatable patterns. A sequence. A momentum. The kind of thing an experienced navigator can recognize, because they've rehearsed the route in life. That is why the Tibetan funerary tradition is not just mourning, it's instruction. It assumes something most modern people can't accept, that consciousness doesn't vanish on impact. It loosens, it separates, it reorganizes. And in that reorganization, it becomes highly sensitive to suggestion. Like a dream, and you already know how suggestible a dream is. A single whisper can become a universe. A single fear can become a monster. A single desire can become a door you walk through without questioning what's on the other side. The Tibetans took that dreamlike vulnerability and treated it like the most critical moment of existence. Because if the mind behaves like a dream after death, then the last habit you die with becomes your compass. And the mind's strongest habit, when stripped of the body, is to chase relief. Relief from fear, relief from uncertainty, relief from the unbearable openness of not knowing what you are. So they built a system to train you, before you die, to recognize what's happening after you die. Not with belief, with recognition. Imagine standing on a cliff edge at night, wind tearing at you. The dark below seems endless. In that moment, if someone shines a bright light behind you, you might mistake it for safety and run toward it, without realizing it's pushing you closer to the drop. This is the atmosphere the teachings describe. Lights, sounds, presences, impressions, some terrifying, some beautiful, all persuasive. And the first task is always the same. Do not react. Do not contract. Do not chase. Recognize. To understand what the Tibetans knew, you have to start with a simple idea. The mind doesn't only create your life, it creates your death. And what it creates in death is so convincing you will call it reality. In Tibetan teachings, the first major threshold is the moment the body stops functioning as your anchor. The senses withdraw like tides. Taste, smell, touch, gone. Then sound becomes strange, as if coming from behind walls. Then vision changes. Then thought itself loosens, like a knot coming undone. The text describes the dissolution of elements, not in a chemistry sense, but in an experiential sense. The heavy feeling of earth collapses. The fluid coherence of water collapses. The warmth of fire collapses. The movement of air collapses. What remains is the subtlest awareness, unmasked. And that's when the clear light appears. Not like a flashlight beam, not like a tunnel, more like an exposure. A boundless radiance that has no edge, no direction, no center. The kind of light that doesn't illuminate objects, because there are no objects left. There is only knowing. This, the teachings say, is your best chance. Because in that moment, the mind is close to its original nature, uncluttered, unfragmented, wide. But here's the brutal part. Most beings don't recognize it. They panic, they interpret vastness as annihilation, and they flee. They look for something smaller, something familiar, something that resembles the old life. And when they flee, the next layer appears. Images, forms, visions, deities in the text, peaceful and wrathful, not necessarily as external gods, but as projections of mind energy taking shape. This is where the Tibetan map becomes psychologically precise, because it doesn't say, you will be judged. It says, you will experience what your mind generates. And what the mind generates when unrestrained is not always kind. It generates everything you didn't digest, every fear you buried, every shame you never named, every desire you fed in secret, every cruelty you justified, every tenderness you withheld. All of it becomes visible, not as a concept, as an environment. If you've ever had a nightmare that felt more real than waking life, you already have a hint of what they're describing. Now, scale that up. Take away the body's calming limitations. Remove the brain's filtering. Remove the social mask. Remove time as you know it. What's left is mind as weather. And you are inside it. This is why the tradition emphasizes reading instructions aloud. Because when you're inside a storm, you don't need philosophy. You need a voice. A voice that reminds you what you're seeing isn't ultimate. A voice that tells you, again and again, recognize, don't chase. Recognize, don't fight. Because the moment you chase relief, you can be led anywhere. And that is the darker implication. If the mind becomes suggestible after death, then the surrounding influences, internal or external, matter enormously. Which leads to the next layer of mystery. Why do so many cultures mark a specific span after death, as if something is still unfolding? Why 40? Why 14? And why do rituals across the world behave like they're not just comforting the living, but assisting the dead? If the window is real, then it isn't sentimental, it's operational. And the question becomes, what happens during it? Picture consciousness like a signal. While alive, your body is the hardware that stabilizes the signal. It gives you a consistent frequency, hunger, gravity, pain, pleasure, time, language. It keeps you you. When the hardware shuts down, the signal doesn't necessarily vanish. It becomes ungrounded. It loses its log. And in an ungrounded state, a signal will drift toward what it can synchronize with. This is not mysticism. It's what any oscillating system does. A metronome on a table will start to match another metronome if the surface allows vibration. Two pendulums will synchronize under the right conditions. A radio will drift until it finds the strongest station. Now translate that into inner life. After death, if consciousness remains as a pattern, it will drift toward coherence, toward a stable lock, toward something it can attach to. And what determines what it attaches to? Habits of attention. What you were trained to follow. What you instinctively obey. What you believe is safe. This is where the Tibetan teachings become almost frighteningly modern. They assume that attention is the steering wheel of reality. So the post-death window is a period of retuning. The mind is searching for the next frequency to inhabit, and in that search, appearances become magnets. Bright, familiar, comforting, terrifying, seductive, all of them competing for attention. Now overlay the human reality of fear. Fear collapses options. Fear narrows perception. Fear seeks the quickest exit. That's why, in dreams, fear creates the most obvious doors. Run here, hide there, do anything but remain. The Tibetan instruction is the opposite of fear. Remain, recognize, don't rush. Because rushing is how you get herded. And this is where the suppressed knowledge framing makes sense. Not as a Hollywood conspiracy, but as an uncomfortable truth. A culture that teaches you to fear death also teaches you to become reactive at the threshold. A culture that refuses to train attention leaves you unskilled at the most vulnerable moment. If your whole life is spent outsourcing authority, outsourcing meaning, outsourcing salvation, outsourcing safety, then at death, you will look for an authority to submit to. You will look for a sign to follow. You will look for a bright instruction. And if the after-death state is as suggestible as the Tibetans claim, then the first thing that captures your attention may capture your trajectory. The Tibetans didn't preach this to scare people. They preached it to sober them. They are essentially saying, the mind is not automatically free at death. It is only free if it recognizes itself. Otherwise it behaves like any untrained mind. It chases, it flees, it clings. And clinging is the mechanism of continuation. If that's true, then the window is not a waiting room. It's a decision engine. But if that's true, then what about people who come back? People who clinically die and return with memories of light, tunnels, presences, life reviews. If even a fraction of those reports point to something real, then maybe we've been given a glimpse, an accidental peek, into a process that most people complete without returning to tell the story. And if we can glimpse the process, we can train for it. That's where the story turns from dread to power. But first, you need to feel it, not as theory, as experience. I want to tell you about someone who didn't believe any of this. 13 years old, Denver, works as an ICU nurse, the kind of person who has seen enough death to stop romanticizing it. The kind of person who trusts what can be measured: blood oxygen, heart rhythms, medication dosages, timestamps. Her name doesn't matter. What matters is what happened. It was winter. She was driving home after a shift that had blurred into a single long, exhausted ache. The road was wet. The sky was low and grey, like the world was holding its breath. She remembers the moment her tires lost grip. Not as panic, as slow motion. The steering wheel going light in her hands, the car rotating. The windshield filled with nothing but spinning headlights and the dull flash of guardrail. Then impact. Then silence. Not unconsciousness. Silence. She described it later like this. It was like someone turned down the volume on the universe until only one thing remained. And that one thing was awareness. She could not feel her legs. She could not feel her face. But she was present. Then, she said, there was pressure, like the air becoming thick, like diving underwater. And then, in the distance, something bright. Not in front of her eyes, because she wasn't sure she had eyes, but in the direction her attention turned, a brightness that felt like meaning, and immediately her mind did what minds do. It reached. She said she felt relief surge up like warm water, like finally, an exit. And then another thought followed, automatic and almost laughable in its simplicity. Go there. But just before she went, she reported something else. A small, quiet, separate awareness inside her, like a witness, asked a different question. Why? Why go there? Why assume brightness equals safety? Why assume the first thing you see is the destination? That question snapped her into a different stance, a stance she had never practiced before. Not believing, not disbelieving, observing. She said the brightness didn't disappear, but it changed. The moment she stopped reaching, the pull softened. The urgency dissolved, and then she noticed what she hadn't noticed before. The brightness wasn't the only thing present. There were other currents, other impressions, dimmer, quieter, less dramatic. And she realized the dramatic pull was coming from her own craving for relief. She didn't interpret it as angels or demons. She interpreted it as mind mechanics. Her attention was the lever. The moment she stopped feeding the lever, the system shifted. And then, sound, voices, real voices. Someone calling her name. The metallic clatter of tools. The sting of cold air as her lungs were forced back into function. She came back. When she told the story, she didn't say, "I saw heaven." She said, "I saw how easily I could have been guided by my own reflex." That's the breakthrough. Not proof. A warning about reflex. Now here's the exercise. Simple, immediate, and safe. Do it now. Pick a point in front of you. Any point. A corner of the room. A spot on the wall. Now imagine, just imagine, there is a bright, comforting light in that spot. The most inviting thing your mind can generate. Something that promises answers. Reunion. Relief. Notice what happens in your body. Do you lean forward slightly? Does your breath change? Do your shoulders soften as if you're about to surrender? That micro-surrender is the mechanism. Now, without rejecting the imagined light, do one thing. Feel the weight of your hands. Feel the temperature in your mouth. Feel your tongue resting. Stay with sensation for 5 seconds. And now notice. The pull of the imagined light weakens when you anchor in direct experience. That anchoring is a skill. The Tibetan tradition is essentially training that skill at the highest stakes. Because after death, there may be nothing else to anchor you except recognition. In the Tibetan map, the deities that appear after death are not primarily moral judges. They are energetic displays, peaceful and wrathful forms that can seduce or terrify you into reaction. If you run from fear, you can be directed by fear. If you chase comfort, you can be directed by comfort. So liberation is not found by choosing the correct hallucination. It's found by recognizing that whatever appears, however convincing, is still appearance. And the one thing that must not be outsourced at the threshold is discernment. Now we move into the empowerment layer. Because the point of this isn't to turn death into a paranoia machine. The point is to remember something you were born with and trained to forget. You can choose how you relate to experience. Modern neuroscience accidentally stumbles into this same territory when it studies meditation and attention. It finds that long practice changes how quickly the mind hooks onto thoughts and how easily it returns to a stable witnessing state. Tibetans don't need a brain scan to know that. They built their entire death training around it. They say, if you can recognize mind while alive, you can recognize mind while dying. If you can recognize fear as a wave while alive, you can recognize fear as a wave after death. If you can recognize craving as a reflex while alive, you can recognize craving as a reflex at the threshold. And when you recognize, you stop being herded. That's sovereignty. Not the macho kind. Not the ego kind. The quiet kind that says, I will not surrender my attention to the first thing that dazzles me. This is why the teachings frame death as a return, not to a place, but to a nature, a remembering. They say the clear light is not foreign. It's what you are beneath the story. But the story is loud. The story is sticky. The story wants continuity. So the practice is to die before you die. Small deaths, daily. The death of compulsive reaction. The death of reflexive belief. The death of needing the world to reassure you. This is where the 40-day motif becomes deeply practical. Whether you take it literally or symbolically, the idea is that the first stretch after death is not random, it's formative. It's like wet cement. Whatever presses into it leaves a shape. So you train now. What will your mind do when it's wet cement? Will it cling? Will it flee? Will it outsource? Or will it recognize? Here are the real-world validations that matter most. Not as proof of metaphysics, but as evidence that consciousness can behave in ways we don't fully explain. People report experiences during cardiac arrest that include awareness, memory, and structured perception, even when the brain is expected to be severely compromised. Whether those experiences are internal constructions or something more, they still point to a critical fact. The boundary between on and off is not as simple as our culture pretends. Terminal lucidity, moments where severely impaired patients become suddenly clear near death, suggests that mind and brain don't always align in the tidy way we want them to. And within Tibetan communities, there are reports of advanced meditators dying in a way that appears to affect the body's post-mortem process, enough that scientists have shown interest in documenting it. Again, not proof of an afterlife, but proof that we don't fully understand what consciousness can do at the threshold. Which brings us to integration. Let's return to the Hook's claim. The most dangerous part of dying may not be dying. It may be the period when your mind is unmoored and hungry for coherence. If a window exists, 40 days, 4 to 9 days, a symbolic span, a functional process, then the core skill is the same. Don't let the first appearance own you. Don't let fear stampede you. Don't let relief seduce you. Instead, practice this daily awareness discipline, 60 seconds, once a day. 1 minute. Set a timer. For the first 20 seconds, feel one raw sensation. The weight of your body, the temperature of air at the nostrils, the pressure of your feet against the floor. For the next 20 seconds, notice one thought, but don't follow it. Label it gently, thinking. Let it pass like a cloud. For the last 20 seconds, notice one desire. An urge to check your phone, fix something, distract yourself, prove something. Feel the urge's sensation without obeying it. That is training for the corridor. That is training for the window. Not because you're trying to beat death, because you're trying to meet it awake. And if the Tibetans are right, even partially, then meeting it awake is the difference between drifting and choosing. The world outside won't change because you listened to this. Bills will still arrive. People will still disappoint you. Bodies will still age, but something in you will be different. You will have rehearsed the most important stance of all, recognition before reaction. So when the ceiling lights smear into knives and the universe goes quiet like snow, you'll know what to do. Not with certainty, with presence. I am sovereign in transition. I choose awareness over reflex. I return to the clear light.